Hi, I'm Tanja Hayes. Let's learn some economics. Let's talk about price ceilings and price floors. So let's start out with our regular old supply and demand diagram. We've got our quantity, we've got our price. We have an equilibrium price and quantity where they cross as always. Now let's say this is the market for apartments, right? Everybody needs a place to live. So let's say that we are realizing that this equilibrium price, or rent in this case, is too high and people can't afford housing. So there's a problem. So maybe we have this well-meaning policy of rent control. So rent control would be where the government says to landlords, basically, you can't charge above a certain amount. You're not allowed to go up higher than that. And so imagine that they're trying to raise the rent, but they're hitting their head on the ceiling. So it's a price ceiling is what that's called. So a price ceiling would be something that is below the equilibrium price, and we're not allowed to go past it, up. So let's say we set our price ceiling here. Price ceiling. I before E, except for a whole lot of times. But anyway, we are correct there. Okay, so here's the price ceiling. You can't charge more than that in rent. Well, what happens? We know how to read a supply and demand diagram, right? So the quantity demanded here, QD, that's pretty high. Lots of people want to rent apartments at this good low rent. But on the supply side, the quantity supplied is not very high. Some of the landlords just don't want to deal with that kind of a low rent and stuff, so they're just not going to have apartments available anymore. And so we have a situation here where quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied. And what is that called? It's called a shortage, as we might recall. So we have a housing shortage at those low rents. Everyone's trying to get these cheap apartments, but there are not enough available. So it was a well-meaning idea trying to help people have cheaper rent. And for these people at this quantity that's being supplied, the people that actually manage to get an apartment, that's good for them. They're paying less in rent. But we now have all these people that wish to get an apartment that can't get an apartment. So that's the downside of a price ceiling. And in fact, we can also think of it as not only is there a shortage, but there is going to be a dead weight loss. So if we recall consumer surplus and producer surplus being all of these triangles here, we are missing out again on this piece of consumer and producer surplus. So this part of our surplus, consumer and producer surplus, is being lost in this case. So we have a dead weight loss type of a triangle and situation. So it's not really ideal, even though it was meant for a good purpose. What could be done instead if we wanted the rent to be this low through market forces? How could we have our supply and demand curves shift so that we get to that price? Well, one idea could be, what if we were able to take this supply curve and shift it out so we had a new equilibrium at that point? That could be an idea, right? And so this is getting to be a lot on this graph, but we could instead try to get to this supply curve 2 with a new equilibrium at our desired level. How could we do that? Well, what are some things that shift the supply curve? For one thing, maybe if we had government programs maybe that encouraged builders with financing and good loans and good deals, maybe that would help them be able to build more, and then we could get more apartments and we could get to that low price instead. So I don't want to talk bad about rent control because it's a great idea, but in theory at least it doesn't quite always help as much as we hope that it would. We're also going to take a look at price floors. All right, so we have our diagram, and this time we're going to think about what happens if there's a price floor. So think about a floor. You can't go down below it. And so a price floor is when there is a law saying you can't go below a certain amount. So that is, for example, the case with the minimum wage. You're not allowed to pay less than that amount. There's a price floor. And so a price floor, unlike normal houses where the floor is on the bottom and the ceiling is on the top, price floors are up above and price ceilings are down below. So it's kind of flip-flop, but that's just how it works. So if there was a price floor here, we're not allowed to go below that. Let's see what happens. Here's our price floor amount, some amount above the equilibrium. And let's just read off what's going on. What's happening with quantity supplied? Well, the supply curve shows that that quantity supplied is all the way over here. And our quantity demanded is going to be from the demand curve only down here. So there is a difference between them. This time there's more supplied than there is demanded, so we call that a surplus. So in that case, if this was regarding the minimum wage, it would be a surplus of workers. In other words, unemployment. And so anytime that we have a price floor, we are going to have a surplus of whatever the item is. And again, maybe it would be more desirable to think of policies that would shift the curves to get to a proper equilibrium. And here too, we can look at our deadweight loss. It would be this triangle here that is kind of missing consumer and producer surplus compared to when we're at equilibrium. We're now at this lowest amount. And how do we know that this is the amount that happens? Well, if this is all that people want, it doesn't matter how much is being supplied. The lowest amount is going to be the binding one, so to speak. So this would be the amount, and then this is the amount of lost consumer and producer surplus, aka deadweight loss again. So that's the story of price floors and price ceilings and the upside down world. And that's all for today. See you soon.